Hey guys, and welcome to the Betterhumanology podcast. We have a pretty simple episode today. It's just me and the microphone, but what I'm actually doing is part 3 in a series that I've been doing at End of 3 Fitness, pretty much on counting macros and flexible dieting. So if you're unfamiliar, I'm not going to cover a lot of the who, what, when, where, why, all that stuff of counting macros or flexible dieting, because I've done that in detail at end3fitness.com. And this is the third part in the series. So the first part is counting macros and flexible dieting 101. Part 2 is how to count macros the right way and how to royally screw it up like I did. And then this is part 3. It's the pros and cons of counting macros plus frequently asked questions. And so just kind of mixing things up here. Part 1 is an entire article. Part 2 is about a 10-minute video plus an article. And now part 3 is just going to be audio. I'm going to answer a lot of the questions. I got a ton of questions about counting macros and flexible dieting. And like I said, I'm not going to go over it in detail, but the quick short of it, what counting macros is you could have a goal, whether performance or body composition. So you want to look a certain way, and you're going to get a macronutrient breakdown for your goal. And a macronutrient is carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And then alcohol is also one, but we don't really talk about how that's going to increase your performance. And so it really is that simple. And we have a lot of calculators. You can check all this stuff out. Go to end3fitness.com/macros. You can follow along in this series. You can use our calculators and everything and check out all that stuff. Now, like I said, what I want to do today is go over the quick pros and cons of counting macros and flexible dieting. But the real meat of everything I want to get into are all of the questions that you guys had today. So first, let's knock out the pros and cons real fast. So counting macros and flexible dieting, what are the pros? The way I see it, you have a lot of diet independence because you're not as restricted. You can really, kind of do your own thing diet-wise, whether that's strict paleo or you're 80% paleo or whatever. You have a lot of independence to do whatever you want without really following someone else's rules. Another pro is you have a lot of flexibility. You have a ton of flexibility because you can, I talked about this in some of the articles, you could eat a Pop-Tart or a donut if you wanted to. While it's not the best food, it's going to count towards your macros, and maybe that slams out all of the carbs that you could have for that day. But it does give you a lot of flexibility to, save your macros in a day and eat something that you want to, that's not as good for you. That's the flexibility. That's a pro. It's also a con that I'll get into in a second. Another pro is complete customization. So there's not going to be a macronutrient breakdown that's perfect for you. I'm going to get into the macro breakdowns and some of the questions that I got. I'm going to get into standard stuff like what should your macro breakdown be if you want to lose weight or if you want to gain muscle and lose fat and all that stuff. I'm going to hop into that, but that's where it comes in because you can really customize it to your activity level, your goal, and it be fully customized. And that, in all honesty, I'm a huge fan of the paleo diet, but I think that is where paleo can fall short. If you need to lose a ton of weight or you have an autoimmune disorder, then yeah, the paleo diet's great. But if you're after some sort of performance goal, or maybe you're not just trying to lose weight, I don't feel like paleo is as customizable without adding some sort of macronutrient breakdown to try and get to your body composition goals. And that's another thing. Body composition is another huge pro. Is the reason counting macros and flexible dieting is not new. It's newly popular, but it's not new. Like bodybuilders have been doing this for a long time. That's actually how I got into it and got a lot of experience with doing this a long time ago. Was I started my fitness journey kind of in the bodybuilding space, and I did screw a lot of things up at first, but you really can shape your body composition pretty easily if you're focusing on your macronutrients the right way. And also the last pro I have here is it's easy to do. Counting macros, I'd say back in the day could be really difficult, but now with your smartphone, apps they have on the computer and everything, counting macros is so easy. You weigh and measure your food. It can do it for you. You can log your food really fast. You can do searches from food databases and all this stuff. And it's super easy. The app that I use most of the time is My Macros Plus. You can check it out. I think it may have, I have an iPhone. I think it may have cost some money, but it's worth it. And so now let's get into some of the cons before I hop into the questions. So the cons of macronutrients and flexible dieting. One is, I've mentioned this several times in the series, is ignoring micronutrients. So this is where I see the biggest problem. Like I said, I'm a big fan of the paleo diet and just eating really, really clean food. And so I have that kind of mentality, and I recommend that you have that mentality. Well, really focus on the quality of your food and, eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, more vegetables than fruit. You want to limit the sugar, and having that really clean diet, and then bringing something in like counting macros. Because if you're only going to count macros, and this is how I screwed it up many years ago, is just, adding in a bunch of low quality food just to get the macronutrients that you want. And just a quick overview, micronutrients are simply the vitamins and minerals that people don't track as much, but they're super important to your health, as I'm sure you're all aware. And so micronutrients are very important. And so a con to counting macros and can be ignoring micronutrients, not having as clean or healthy of a diet because you're only focused on the macros. Another thing is this is kind of goes in the same line, but I've seen people make some really poor decisions just to try and meet their macros in a day. They might get to the end of the day, they're out of carbohydrates, maybe they're out of fat, meaning that you've eaten your allotment for how many grams you could have that day, but you have a ton of protein left, so you're having like 3 protein shakes at the end of the day. Or, just some crazy stuff. I do think that people get a little bit carried away with it. Yeah, you want to meet your macros, but it would be better to plan. Like, do a lot of planning and know kind of what you're going to do, as opposed to getting to the end of the day and just eating a bunch of crap that you hate, or because that's not sustainable. And that's what I'm going to get into in the questions here in a minute. But any diet that you hate or that you're forcing yourself to do isn't going to last. Even if you are really mentally tough and disciplined, it's probably, what are we talking about? Months, maybe it'll last, as opposed to the average person being able to do it for days. It really has to fit in your lifestyle. And if slamming, a bunch of egg whites and protein shakes at the end of the day because you didn't hit your protein is something you enjoy doing, go for it. It's not something I enjoy doing. So I think that could be a huge con to meeting your macros or flexible dieting, is because you don't, there's not enough planning. And then the last con that you've probably already thought in your head as I've been saying some of this stuff is counting, weighing, and measuring. We all hate counting, weighing, and measuring our food. It is important if you want to do macros the right way, and I talk about that in part 2 of this series that you can check out in the article. But counting, weighing, and measuring, it sucks. Like, it really does. It's not fun to add that step to your food, but my recommendation for everyone, if you want to go down this journey, is first get a macro plan. We have the macro calculators for you in these articles that I'm talking about, into3fitness.com/macros. Get a plan, and then just look at the plan. Don't plan on using the plan. Just look at the plan, and then go about at least one full day tracking everything, and see what your macronutrient breakdown is when you're not following a plan at all, and see what it is. See if you're 60% carbohydrates. Find out where you're at and see how far off it is from a recommendation. From one of our calculators, and then that might help you want to do it a little bit more. And then after that, if that convinces you to do it, get a lot of practice, do it for a few months. But I don't count, weigh, and measure my food every single day. What I kind of do now are more like progress checks, because I'm more in a maintenance phase. Like, I'm happy with my body weight. To get stronger, I have to gain weight sometimes, and that's when I start tracking a little bit more. But what I do these days is I have pretty standard diet. Is I'll just, once a week or every couple weeks, I'll count my macros, really structured and strict for a few days, and then just make sure that it's pretty much on par. And it's very easy to tell if I'm if I'm on track, because my body will lose or gain weight relatively easy. All right, so those are the quick pros and cons. But now what I really wanted to do was hop into your questions that you have today. And so first thing I want to say about all this dieting stuff I mentioned a second ago is the only diet that's going to work is one that you can handle for the long term. That's going to be the best option for you. So if this isn't it, then don't do it. You need to do, if just paleo, because the whole premise behind paleo, and this is one of the questions I'm going to answer today, is the fact that you don't really have to count, weigh, or measure anything. You just eat healthy in kind of the structured format that paleo recommends, and you're fine. And it's true to a point. But if that's more your style, you're like, man, I don't want to count, weigh, measure anything. I just want to eat healthy and see where I go. That's fine. You can do that. If counting macros, like I'm a numbers guy when it comes to programming and the barbell, and I'm a numbers guy when it comes to food. I'm just a numbers guy in general. So I like this stuff. I like knowing, how to eat towards my goals. And your performance, I think that a lot of people might be at even if you're doing pretty well, like an 80 to 90% optimal, if your nutrition isn't dialed in. Some people haven't even experienced fully optimal because they haven't really dialed in their diet. And I challenge everyone to do that at least for some amount of time. And then you might even get addicted to it and become kind of a numbers freak as I am. So one thing that's overlooked is, I'm kind of giving you a breakdown before we hop into these questions, is just, your body is going to respond differently. Each person is going to respond differently to what you eat. I know it's not fair that, people who are leaner, they can get away with eating more carbs and treats and everything, but that's just the way it is. And people who are leaner can have more slip-ups. If you're not leaner, you're trying to lose weight, you don't have that room for discipline. And that's going back to the macro to lose discipline, should I say. And so going back to the macro con or pro, it's kind of both, being able to eat what you want. You got to think about, what you're doing to your brain. If you want to throw a donut in there, is that really something that you should be doing? Even though it fits with your macros, it's something that you should be doing. And then another thing about macros is just that your macronutrient goal, profile, breakdown, whatever you want to call it, can change all the time. There's no, I'm going to follow this macronutrient plan, I'm set for life. It's going to change. It's going to change on your goals. It's going to change as you lose weight. It's going to change all the time. So just keep that in mind. And then also the last thing I want to say before I really hop into the questions, I know I've been saying we're going to get to the questions for a while now, but everything I'm saying and talking about today is under the assumption that you train each week. Anywhere from 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a week, you train in some way, shape, or form. And I'm talking about weight training, high-intensity interval training, lifting, sports. What I'm not talking about are people who are sedentary, do nothing, and I'm also not talking about extreme endurance athletes. I don't really work with extreme endurance athletes. You can run on a lot. You can go one of two ways with extreme endurance athletes. They can run on a lot of healthy fats, or they can run on a lot of carbohydrates, and that's kind of whatever works for them. But I'm not talking about endurance athletes. I'm talking about people, probably most of the people who really listen to this podcast. I wouldn't say we have a lot of sedentary listeners, but you train in some way, shape, or form 4 to 7 hours per week. And then also, if you're going to try any of this stuff out, try it at least for 4 weeks before you abandon ship and say it doesn't work. All right, guys, let's get into the questions now, starting with goals. I got a lot of questions about goals, so I'll just hop right into the questions. It says, what is the recommended macro breakdown if I'm looking to gain muscle or put on mass? This is a really common question. So you can do one of two things, and really your nutrition plan, your macro breakdown would be about 30% protein, 40% carbs, and 30% fat. And that's my recommendation. It's kind of the zone prescription, and it's just a solid breakdown. You're going to be taking in more carbohydrates, and really you need more carbohydrates if you want to go for muscle gain. Some of you, if you're eating a lower carb diet and you see how many carbs 40% actually is, and you eat relatively clean right now, it might throw you off. You're like, wow, that's a lot of carbohydrates. But if you're running on carbs, you're not in a state of ketosis being Typically less than 50 grams of carbohydrates consumed per day, and your body is running on of ketones or fat for energy as opposed to carbohydrates. Barring that, you're going to need carbohydrates, and so just make sure that they're clean. But yeah, the nutrition plan for that would be 30% protein, 40% carbs, 30% fat. All right, and then I'm just knock out all the goal questions. What's the recommended breakdown for maximizing fat loss? Really, I think that you can go one of two ways. You can go high protein, moderate fat, lower carbs. So your nutrition plan would look like 40% protein, 35% fat, and 25% carbohydrates. Or you can go higher fat, moderate protein, lower carbohydrates, which is 40% fat, 35% protein, and 25% carbs. So the carbs stay about the same, 25% of your diet, and this is a relatively low carb plan. But still, it's low carb, but it's not ketosis. And I'll mention ketosis a few times because if you want to do rapid fat loss, just like rapid fat loss, you need to go into a state of ketosis. I've seen it work successfully for a lot of people, but I've also not seen it work for people. So be mindful of that. But lower carbohydrate is typically the way to go with those breakdowns that I just said. But there's one thing to keep in mind, like going low carb, but pushing your intensity really hard in the workouts. It can stimulate a lot of hunger hormones. As at the same time, it's decreasing the hormones that suppress hunger. So this leaves you wanting to eat all the time after your training. And it's not great. So all I'm trying to say there is if you're on an ultra low carb diet and it's combined with high intensity exercise, you're going to run into a lot more discipline problems. You're going to want to eat all the time. This is where yo-yo dieting comes in because people are just they're jacking with their hormones when you're going extremely high intensity and low carb, but not ketosis. You're setting yourself up. It doesn't mean you're going to fail. It just you're setting yourself up to be tempted to fail. Is what I would say there. All right, next question. What is the recommended breakdown for fat loss plus maximizing gains? The elusive, how do I, shred fat and gain muscle? Is it possible? A lot of people think that's like a gimmicky thing. It's not. You can actually do it. It's just when you decide that that's your goal, you have to immediately take a long-term approach. If you're not taking a long-term approach on this, then forget it. You have one of two ways. You can drop body fat real fast and then start building muscle up afterwards, or you can try and do both at the same time. It's just going to be a lot slower, long process. So if you want to lose weight, and I kind of combine some of these questions together, lose some weight but get stronger at the same time. How do I know if I want low carb or not? I don't really know body fat percentage, blah, blah, blah. So how do I know the right plan? And so, like I said, basically this person's asking, how do you maximize fat loss while maximizing muscle gain? And so the nutrition plan I'm going to recommend you can do is just try out a split, an absolutely split macro plan. So 33% protein, 33% fat, 33% carbs. Just try it out. I think that's going to be pretty good for a lot of people because the breakdown is going to ensure that you get enough protein for muscle repair and growth, and it provides enough fat to support your, like testosterone production, and it supplies enough carbohydrates to provide training and keep your stamina up. And it's going to work great. Like I said, the protein for muscle growth. And it doesn't really have the tendency, if you're training, as I said, the caveat to all this stuff, it doesn't really provide for excess carbohydrates. So it supports lean gains and lean mass. So that's kind of the breakdown. It's just if you're training regularly and pretty hard, that's a great, just a balanced breakdown. Some people look at these macro plans and they're like, holy crap, that's a lot of protein. And I agree with you. That's why my when I created the calculator, I recommend people go higher fat, moderate protein, low carbohydrate. And that's pretty much what I do most of the time, is because you don't, and I will challenge some conventional wisdom here. I don't think that you need as much protein as people are saying that you need. And I would say athletes, because so the recommended daily allowance, like on a box of food or whatever, is 50 grams of protein. That's absolutely ridiculous. It's not enough protein at all. But then some of the higher recommendations of eating, 2+ grams of protein per pound of body weight, which would put me somewhere close to 400 grams of protein a day, I think is absolutely ridiculous. So you kind of have to weigh, I think you need more protein than the conventional wisdom is saying, but then I think that there are people out there who are in health and fitness who are saying that you need way too much protein. And I think it gets ridiculous at a certain point. So, the base amount that you should have is about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. And I'm breaking it down to kilogram, which I don't typically do, but it's just easier to talk about, so not per pound. And then that's just base, like what you need, I think, to survive. If you're pretty active, then it's going to be 2 grams per kilogram, which is a great target. And then if you are extremely overweight, you calculate how much protein you should use based off of your target weight, not your current weight. So if you are 300 pounds and you want to be 250 pounds, that's how much calculate your protein based off of your goal weight, not your current weight. And I mean, protein's super important. Your body uses it for everything, not just muscles. It really does a lot of different processes in your body, so you need it. But I really don't think that you need the excessive amounts of protein that some people are recommending out there. And another thing, the recommendations that I'm kind of giving is, so if you're extremely active or you're just active person, you can go 2 kilograms. And I'm perfectly comfortable with going back to pounds, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight or a little bit over. I think that's fine. Like, I'm a 185-pound guy. Consuming 185 grams of protein a day is doable. It's a lot of protein. It's good. Going up to 200 is fine. But much above that, I think it starts to get ridiculous. When you're talking anything 2 or over, it starts to get ridiculous. But everything that I'm talking about assumes that you kind of have an average body fat percentage. So if you're a male that's way above 20% or female way above 30%, then you don't need that much protein. You're going to use your goal weight to calculate your protein requirements. All right, guys, so those are kind of some of the goal questions. Let's go into some of the other questions. These are a little bit easier to answer. So what if my food does not have a label? I mentioned this in the video in part 2 of this series. If your food doesn't have a label, which that's good. Most healthy foods out there, like grass-fed ground beef you got at a farmer's market, or fruits and vegetables, most of that stuff doesn't have a label. So how do you count your macros for that stuff? Really, you're just going to look it up. And the answer is kind of Google it. But if you're using an app, they have access to a lot of food databases there. You can weigh how many grams of blueberries you're eating and then look it up. And that's it. It's pretty simple stuff. Another question is, how long would a macro plan be good for? And I mentioned this kind of earlier. Your macro plan is going to change frequently. I recommend trying a new diet for at least 4 weeks. And then if you're starting to see results or seeing some of the results that you want, stick with it for a solid 12 and then reassess your macro goals after the 12 weeks. So someone wanted me to touch on intermittent fasting. So we actually did a podcast episode on this. If you want a lot of information about intermittent fasting, make sure you check out our episode on that. So just my thoughts on it in general. I did some intermittent fasting, and I talk about it on that podcast. I did it on accident, really. I was just eating kind of an early dinner because I would eat when my kids would eat, and then I wouldn't eat again at night, and then I would, wake up, train early in the morning, and then go a long time before I'd actually consume calories again. And so I was doing, I'd say, an abbreviated version, none of the crazy parts. I don't think that intermittent fasting is ineffective. I think that it works. A lot of people are doing it to like gain lean muscle mass and stuff. That's the big claim, but it's almost faddish to me. Like, yeah, it works, but you know what else works? Eating real food and just doing that regularly, counting your macros, all that. Everything works. Like, all this stuff works. I'm not really down with intermittent fasting because I just don't think it keeps me optimal. I think it's good maybe to do every once in a while, but I'd really rather be full of. I'm not into tricks. Like, I don't want to like trick my body. I don't think that counting macros is a trick, or a fad. Like, this has been around for a long time, gaining some ground in popularity now, but I don't like tricks and stuff. So intermittent fasting, yes, effective. Try it out if you want to. But overall, I don't think that it's necessary to achieve your goals. You can achieve your goals a lot of different ways. It's the same with, barbell training. Like you see a lot of these squat everyday programs coming out. People are charging for them now. Corey Gregory has this free one. It's just like all these squat everyday programs. Yeah, we've experimented with that at Into 3 Fitness as well. Should you squat every day? Yeah, you can squat every day. Will it make you stronger? Yeah, it'll make you stronger. You know what else makes you stronger? Not squatting every day. Squatting once or twice a week. Some of the strongest men in the world only squat once or twice a week. So, but do some really strong guys squat every day? Yeah, they do that too. So really there's not a definitive answer. You can play with it. You can do whatever you want. You can have fun, whatever's sustainable. Going all the way back to kind of the intro here. What's going to work for you in the long run? Is intermittent fasting going to work for you? Some people it works out great for, because maybe you only want to eat one meal a day. I personally am not in that boat. But yeah, it works. Just decide what you want to do. All right, so then I got a question. This is like kind of an in the weeds question, but I'm happy to answer it. It said, I'm interested in your thoughts on carbs versus net carbs. Do you count dietary fiber as a carb? And then someone else had asked, she said, as Christine asked, I'm also interested in your thoughts on don't count veggies. Okay, so let's talk about this real fast without getting like too boring anyone. So net carbs are just grams of total carbohydrates in food minus the grams of fiber. And the reason is because fiber is a carb that your body doesn't really digest, and so it doesn't raise your blood sugar levels or trigger like an insulin response like normal carbohydrates would. So you can almost not count them technically. And so that's why people get hung up on that. But I would be curious to know how much fiber you're actually consuming for this to like truly matter. Or maybe you're going into a state of ketosis, and so your regulation of carbohydrates is very, very important. Or maybe you're just eating a ton of fruits and vegetables, which is awesome, and so you are getting a ton of fiber. So it actually does matter. That would be my first question, but I don't typically, worry about that as much. I feel like it can be wasted time or effort depending on whether or not you are trying to achieve ketosis or something. Because if there's if there's like a caloric difference due to the fiber, that it's small enough that it's probably like you worked it off some other way. If we're talking about working off those carbohydrates, like the net carbs versus total carbs, is probably small enough to where it doesn't matter, is what I'm saying. Is like it doesn't matter as much. So count your fats, your proteins, and your total carbs, and then monitor the percent contribution to total calories of each of those in addition to your caloric intake. So those are the most impactful macronutrient numbers, and they're the ones that you can manage. Getting really hung up in the carbs versus net carbs, unless it's significant. Like I said, if it's significant, then maybe you want to start considering it. I know people in ketosis worry more about their net carbs than they do their total carbs, because they're more worried about, blood sugar levels and triggering an insulin response and stuff like that. Personally, I'm not in ketosis, and a lot of the athletes that I'm giving nutrition plans to or recommending stuff to, they're not really in ketosis either. I think I only have one athlete right now who is trying to achieve a state of ketosis. So yeah, it kind of depends on your goal. I personally wouldn't worry about it because I think that it's a negligible difference, and only matters if you have really very, very specific goals. As far as, and some people, someone said, do you count veggies? Yeah, I count everything. I would just count everything, because vegetables, I know they have a lot of fiber. As we said, doesn't necessarily raise your blood sugar levels or trigger an insulin response, but you just track everything. You want to track everything that you're eating if you're going to do this, just so you know. And really, there's not a lot of carbohydrates or calories in vegetables, so it doesn't really hurt to track it, unless you're on like a really restricted diet. So I got another question. When counting macros, is one food only counted as the macronutrient highest or all it contains? Certain sources give different ways of doing this. Also, when eating natural foods that don't necessarily have a nutrition label, how are these counted? Some articles state things like veggies don't count because they're high in fiber. Just wonder your thoughts. So I kind of covered that. Veggies don't really count. It's almost like you can have an unlimited amount of vegetables in a day, really. Like whatever you want to eat, because you're just going to get a ton of fiber, not a lot of calories. It's not going to really jack with your blood sugar levels. So yeah, you can, I understand why people are saying that, but just track it. You can track it. Just track it. It's fine. And let's see. I think I kind of answered some of those questions already. Natural foods. Yeah, like I said, you can look that stuff up. I think you'd be really hard pressed to find something these days that you found that doesn't have a food label that you won't be able to find the breakdown online. And it might not be perfect. If it's not perfect, get as close as you can. You're counting macros here. This is not exact science, but you just get as close as you can. And I didn't really understand the first part of that. Is one food only counted as the macronutrient it is highest in? So when any food, you're counting all macronutrients. So if you had coconut oil, that's a bad example because it's basically all fat. But you're going to count all every single macronutrient that it'll count towards your allotment of those macronutrients. So hopefully that answers that question. And here's a big one. I get this question a lot. Can paleo and flexible dieting work together? I've always heard people doing one or the other. Would it just be picking paleo-friendly foods to fit in your macro plan? So I probably should have started with this question because it's a very, very good question, and it can be really confusing. So if you are extremely strict paleo, my wife and I found this out the hard way, it can be very hard to fit into, like, especially like a zone profile or something. It can be very difficult without a lot of planning and being really on top of it to eat paleo and still hit a macronutrient goal. And that the only reason being is because your carbohydrates, when you're trying to eat a lot of carbohydrates in your paleo, those are kind of limited. Typically your snack foods, quote unquote snack foods in paleo, contain a lot of fat. So it can be very, very difficult. And so that's why I normally end up doing the 80-20 or 90-10 like paleo-ish diet. And just for more carbohydrates. Right now, I'm pretty low carb, higher fat, moderate protein. But yes, they absolutely can work together, and I think they should work together. Because like I said, paleo gives that amazing mindset of eating clean foods, eating healthy foods. And then after that, you can add the macronutrient breakdown. It might just take a little bit of creativity. Things like Whole30, they absolutely hate counting macros because it goes against the whole, like, they think that it's too restrictive. And I 100% agree. It's very restrictive to count, weigh, and measure food. And it's a huge turnoff to a lot of people. I understand that. I don't really recommend counting macros for people who are very, like, extremely obese. I think that you should just clean up your diet a ton, eat paleo, go Whole30, do something like that, and you're going to lose the weight. But once you start trying to dial it in to a very, very specific body composition goal or a very, very specific performance goal, you're going to want to have a macronutrient profile that's going to help you achieve that goal, as opposed to, because if you think that you're stuck on like a strength PR or something, most people who don't have a very clean diet are going to jump programs. They're going to think that the program needs to change. It could be possible, but maybe you should try your diet. If you're not doing anything with your diet, you're just kind of all over the place, then you need to try that out first and see how that works for you. So anyway, all I'm trying to say, paleo is great, gives you a really good idea of how to eat clean foods, and then you need to kind of just plan and compare that. I think that they do work together. They typically clash because, the big pros of Whole30 and paleo is the fact that you don't have to do those things, but once you start getting really dialed into achieving a goal, I think that it's necessary. So someone said, what if I don't have a food scale? Then I recommend you go on Amazon and buy a food scale. I wish I had some sort of secretive tip for you there, but they're seriously, like, you can get one for $10 on Amazon. Get a food scale. They even have travel size ones that you can use. So get a food scale. Someone asked thoughts on eating organic, grass, grain-fed, GMO-free, blah, 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 all that stuff. Let's see. Okay, so just basically eating clean food. Is it important? So, like, should you have grass-fed meat as opposed to, grain-fed or just conventional meat? Does it matter? So this is something I've covered a lot, especially in the nutrition course that we have. Does it matter? Yes, it does matter. So try to eat the cleanest foods possible. Is it a little bit more expensive? Yes, it is. But there are a lot of tips and tricks that you can do. And I really feel like there is a shift in the market because Walmart is starting to sell grass-fed meat. And I don't know the absolute quality of that or whatever, but you don't have to be getting the most expensive stuff. Really, it's doing the best you can. If you can't eat everything organic and grass-fed, that's fine. Just do the best that you can. And if that's, you're like, okay, look, I can afford this much meat, and that's what I'll do. Then just one step at a time. Do what you can. Shop for deals. Going with organic frozen vegetables can save you money sometimes. Shopping at a local farmer's market, that can save you money sometimes. Getting everything at the grocery store can be more expensive, but seek out those farmers markets, see what kind of deals you can work with those guys, and they typically have really good prices. And if you don't have a farmer's market in town, there are a lot of places now you can even order your meat online. And sometimes it's the spend money to make money principle of buying in bulk, spending a couple $100 on meat, but it lasting you for several months. So those are my thoughts. I think that it is important just for the overall health of you and your family. I know it's expensive. We've battled this I'm married with 2 kids. It is expensive, can be expensive. But we have a pretty, of all the things we spend money on, say our grocery budget is pretty high, and that's on purpose. We don't spend money on a lot of other things like eating out or TV or all this other stuff because we've put such a priority and an emphasis on our nutrition. So really, I think it might come down to a priority thing, but I'm not sure. All right, so someone said, first question is that I thought doing low carb meant trying to keep carbs under 50 grams per day. Is ketosis possible with this number of carbs, or is ketosis necessary in following this plan? So I do have a low carb calculator, and what I didn't mean by the low carb calculator is that I meant it was ketosis by any means. I don't typically recommend, especially like if you didn't know it, if you just filled out my low carb calculator and I recommended you eat 36 grams of carbohydrates in a day and you had no idea what ketosis is, you're going to feel like absolute crap for a few days. Your body's going to transition. You don't know what's going on, so you've never heard of ketosis. No, so I didn't want to trick anyone to going into ketosis. It's just a lower carbohydrate diet. Yes, going below 50 grams of carbohydrates per day is where ketosis can kick in. I do recommend that for rapid weight loss. Is it necessary? No. A lot of people do ketosis. I think it's great. It's worth a try. Going low carb to me doesn't mean going into ketosis. It just means going lower carbohydrate, because some of the recommendations out there, if you just go to like randomsite.com with a macro calculator, they're going to spit out a 40 to 50% carbohydrate diet for you to meet your goals. And I just can't even get on board with that. Part of the reason I'm doing all the stuff that I'm doing now is because I think things are getting a little carried away. So I just mean lower carbohydrate as opposed to 50% or 40% of your diet, bringing it down to 30, 25, 20% of your diet, going into ketosis if you want to for specific reasons. All right, last 2 questions. How do you calculate your own percentages? And I'll do this relatively fast because I cover this a little bit in the first one. So how you calculate it is you have each macronutrient has a set amount of calories. And so carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram, protein 4 calories per gram, and fat 9 calories per gram. And that's where the big differentiating factor comes into play. And so just to break that down, if you wanted to, say you started with calories, so say you wanted, you did an activity calculator or whatever, and you needed to consume, 2,500 calories, just to kind of maintain what you're doing. So what you would do is, like, if you wanted a 40% breakdown, so you have 2,500 calories, you take 30% of that. So 2,500 times 30% times 30% and then times 40%. So now you have how many calories, and I'm not actually doing the math right now, but you just have how many calories of each of those things that you would have. So if that equaled, let's say it was just a split evenly. Okay, here, I'll do it just because I want to help. I got my calculator right here. So if you were to split that evenly, 33% all the way down the board, that'd be 825 calories should come from protein, 825 calories should come from fat, and 825 calories from carbohydrates. So now let's break that down into grams, since I already told you how many grams and calories there were. So you'd say 825 divided by 4. And so that's 206 grams of protein and carbohydrates that you can have in a day. But then if you were to do fat, that's 9 calories per gram. So you have to take 825 and divide it by 9. So that's only 91 grams of fat. And so that's where that factors in. It's because fat has so many more calories per gram that's how the percentage is. Because normally if you look at the percentages, it looks weird because you're like, wait a minute, you have this many total macros. That's not 40% of this. It's because you're basing how many calories per gram a macronutrient has to the total calories. So hopefully that's not too confusing. I'm a visual learner, so I feel like explaining this stuff on audio is difficult, but maybe it's easy for you. Maybe you understood everything I just said. And then the last question, what do you do about cravings? This is a common question, a popular question, and this really is just going to come down to discipline. And I think that at first it's going to be challenging, but if you can do everything in your power to stick with something for 4 weeks, you just need to stick with it long enough to see results. And I really feel like if you start seeing results, you will be much less likely to break because you're seeing the results. Now you're getting a little bit more motivated, and you're excited, and now you're willing to stick with it because you know what you're doing is effective. So I don't have a lot of advice on the cravings. If you're doing a macronutrient plan, you have the flexibility to break the diet, not eat clean, as long as it still meets your macronutrients. So that's kind of that flexibility pro that comes in with macronutrients and flexible dieting. But if you're hitting this problem all the time, it's just going to come down to discipline and mental toughness, something we talk about all the time. But you could do it, stick with it for 4 weeks, see the results, and then you're going to stay with it for the long term. All right, guys, that's it. That's all I have on this topic. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you're enjoying the podcast and what we're doing, we have a lot of new episodes coming out. We've kind of been doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes. New nutrition product is out at Into 3 Fitness, and so that's what we've been spending a lot of time on, and a lot of time with our athletes at Garage Gym Athlete. You can check out all that stuff at into3fitness.com. But if you're enjoying the podcast, head over to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review and a positive comment. Ask us a question in your review, and I'll be sure to look it over and answer the question in the podcast. Anything you guys need, just let me know. But that's it for the Better Humanology podcast today.